This is a story about the summer the walls came down. It's a story about the fragile boundary between privacy and honesty, and how one afternoon of total exposure transformed a traditional household into something entirely different. The heat that July was a physical weight, the kind of Midwestern humidity that turns the air into a thick, invisible blanket. For 19-year-old Elias, that heat was the backdrop to a newfound sense of total, unadulterated freedom. His father, a stern, corporate architect named Julian, had been dispatched to a massive project in Singapore. He was gone for the better part of 3 months, taking his rigid schedules and his judgmental silences with him. Then there was Catherine, Elias's mother. She was a woman who had spent 20 years perfecting the art of the suburban smile. She was kind, but distant, always busy with errands, bridge clubs, or visiting her sister 3 towns over. When she announced she was leaving for a 4-day retreat with an old college friend immediately after Julian's departure, Elias felt like he had finally inherited the kingdom. The house was a sprawling, silent fortress of beige carpets and polished mahogany. For the first time in his life, Elias didn't have to look over his shoulder. He didn't have to turn his music down or explain why he was still awake at 3:00 a.m. As Catherine's silver SUV disappeared around the bend of the driveway, Elias felt a surge of adrenaline. He didn't waste time. He went through the ritual of the liberated. He locked the front door, checked the perimeter, and shed the weight of his clothes. He wasn't just naked physically. He felt naked of the expectations of being a good son or a promising student. He retreated to his bedroom, a space that had always felt like a pressurized cabin. He gathered his supplies, the things every young man in the digital age knows by heart, and settled in. For hours, the world outside didn't exist. He was immersed in the flickering glow of his monitor, lost in the rabbit holes of the internet's most private corners. With his noise-canceling headphones clamped over his ears, he was in a sensory vacuum. He couldn't hear the wind in the oaks outside, the hum of the refrigerator, or, crucially, the sound of a key turning in the front lock. Catherine had returned early. Her friend had come down with a migraine, and the trip was cut short. She had walked into the house quietly, expecting to find her son studying or perhaps gaming. Instead, she found a silence so heavy it felt suspicious. She moved toward his room, perhaps intending to surprise him with takeout. She pushed the door open. Elias had forgotten to click the latch, and the world stopped turning. "Elias, what on earth are you doing? Shut that off. Right now." The voice didn't just break the silence, it shattered Elias's soul. He sat there, frozen, the blue light of the screen reflecting off his panicked eyes. He didn't even have the presence of mind to cover himself or close the tabs. He just stared as his mother, her face a mask of pure, unbridled shock, spun on her heel and fled down the hallway. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. It was a vibrating, electric silence. Elias sat in the dark for what felt like hours, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The shame wasn't just a feeling, it was a physical sickness. He eventually dressed, his hands shaking so violently he could barely button his shirt. He found Catherine in the kitchen. She wasn't crying, and she wasn't yelling. She was just sitting at the island, staring at a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. The air between them was thick with the things people in their family never talked about. "I'm sorry," Elias whispered, his voice cracking. I didn't think you'd be back. I'll never do it again." "I promise, Mom. I'm so sorry." She didn't look at him. She just took a slow, measured sip of the cold tea. "We'll talk later, Elias. Just, not now." That night was the longest of his life. He expected a lecture, a phone call to his father in Singapore, or a permanent ban on his electronics. But the next day, something shifted. The suburban smile was gone, replaced by a strange, contemplative intensity in his mother's eyes. Dinner was a quiet affair of pasta and redirected glances. But as Elias moved to clear the table, Catherine spoke. Her voice was steady, devoid of the earlier hysteria. "Elias, sit down." He obeyed, bracing for the impact. "I've been thinking about yesterday," she began, tracing the rim of her wine glass. "And I realized that my reaction was outdated. You're 19. You're a man. You have a body, and that body has impulses. Your father and I, we've raised you in a house where everything is tucked away and hidden. But hiding things doesn't make them go away. Elias blinked, stunned. Mom, you don't have to, I want to understand, she interrupted. How often do you feel the need to do that? The question felt like a trap. He hesitated, then decided that if the ship was sinking, he might as well be honest. Every day. Sometimes more. And do you have someone? A girl you're seeing? No, he said, looking at his feet. Not right now. Catherine nodded slowly. I see. Well, Elias, I want us to make a deal. I don't want you sneaking around in your own home. I don't want you living in fear of the person who gave birth to you. This is your house too. If you have needs, take care of them. Don't stop on my account. I won't go running out of the house every time you want a moment of privacy. We're adults. We should be able to exist in the same space without these walls of shame. Elias felt like he was floating. It was a bizarre, surreal liberation. But it was only the beginning. A few days later, the humidity broke into a torrential thunderstorm. The house felt cozy, insulated against the world. Elias was in the living room, tentatively testing the boundaries of this new honesty. He had the TV on, scrolling through a streaming site. Catherine walked in, wearing a silk robe, and sat on the armchair across from him. What are we watching? She asked, her tone conversational. Just browsing, Elias said, his heart rate ticking up. Is it like the one from the other day? She asked. Elias froze. Mom, please. We don't have to go there. Why not? She challenged, a small, defiant smile playing on her lips. If it's part of your life, why is it a secret? Is it because you think I'm too old to understand? Or because you think I'm too fragile? She stood up, walked to the couch, and sat beside him. Show me. Show me what you were watching that had you so captivated. It was a moment of pure psychological vertigo. Hesitantly, Elias navigated back to the history. He clicked a video, one featuring a woman who looked strikingly like a younger, more vibrant version of the women in their neighborhood. The sound of the rain outside competed with the digital moans from the speakers. Either eye didn't flinch. She watched with a clinical, almost academic interest. She's very fit, Catherine remarked. The production quality is much higher than I would have imagined. Is this what you like? This type of intensity? Elias couldn't speak. He just nodded. I think, Catherine said, standing up after a few minutes, that the world spends too much time telling young men they are monsters for having desires. I won't be another person in your life who does that. Go ahead, Elias. Finish your movie. I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything. The weeks that followed were a blur of redefined boundaries. The awkwardness didn't vanish, it evolved. It became a shared secret, a strange, unspoken bond that felt more real than any conversation they'd had in the previous decade. They watched more together, Catherine occasionally commenting on the aesthetics or the themes, stripping away the taboo, until it felt as mundane as watching the nightly news. One evening, Catherine returned from the mall with a small, neatly wrapped box. She handed it to Elias while he was lounging on the sofa. I noticed you were using those old, cheap earbuds, she said. If we're going to be honest about our hobbies, you should at least have the right equipment. Inside were a pair of top-tier, professional-grade wireless headphones. Thanks, Mom, Elias said, a lump forming in his throat. It wasn't just about the gift, it was the validation. Try them on, she urged. He put them on, and the world vanished. The sound was immersive, crystal clear. He looked up at his mother, who was smiling with a warmth he hadn't seen since he was a small child. In that moment, the unconventional nature of their summer didn't feel wrong. It felt like they were finally seeing each other as human beings, stripped of the roles of mother and son that had kept them as strangers for 19 years. But then, the calendar turned. The 3 months were up. Julian was coming home. The night before his father's flight landed, Catherine came into Elias's room. The air was cool now, the first hints of autumn creeping in. Everything changes tomorrow, she said, sitting on the edge of his bed. I know, Elias replied. Back to the silence. Back to the locked doors. Not entirely, Catherine said, reaching out to ruffle his hair. Your father lives in a world of shadows. He always has. But you and I, We've stepped into the light. Even if we have to play the part when he's here, don't ever think you have to hide who you are from me again. This summer wasn't just about your pastime, Elias. It was about us realizing that we don't have to be afraid of the truth. She kissed his forehead. Good night, my son. When Julian returned, the house reverted to its polished, mahogany state. The schedules resumed. The suburban smiles were donned like armor. Julian talked about architecture and interest rates, never noticing the new, sharp intelligence in his wife's eyes or the quiet confidence in his son's stride. Elias eventually went back to university, but he carried that summer with him like a talisman. He found that he was no longer driven by the frantic, shameful urges of his peers. Because the shame had been burned away by a mother's radical acceptance, he was able to approach his own life with a sense of balance and self-respect. Years later, when Elias was a man with a family of his own, he sat in his own living room, looking at his teenage son. He thought about that humid July, the flickering screen, and the woman who chose honesty over tradition. He realized then that Catherine hadn't just caught him in a moment of vulnerability. She had saved him from a lifetime of hiding. That he reached out, much like his mother had, and spoke to his son not as a disciplinarian, but as a fellow traveler in the complicated journey of being human. And in that moment, the legacy of that unconventional summer lived on, a quiet rebellion against the dark, one honest conversation at a time. The satisfying end wasn't a return to normalcy. It was the realization that normal is just a story we tell to people we don't trust. Elias and Catherine never spoke of the specifics of that summer again, but they didn't have to. Every time they caught each other's eye across a crowded dinner table, they knew. They were the only ones in the room who were truly free. The house at Oak Creek Estates remained quiet, the lawn remained perfectly manicured, and the mahogany remained polished. But inside, the walls were gone, and for Elias, the sun never quite set on that long, strange, and beautiful summer.